and I'm studying the impact of shark bite incidents on the development of public policy in Australia, South Africa, and the United States. So for instance, whether that's shark conservation policies or whether it's shark control, beach protection policies.
All right, and what sort of policies do these countries have, and how do they vary?
You know, in the U.S., it focuses more on human control measures. So when there's a shark bite incident or a shark attack, the government and localities look for ways to manage human interaction with sharks. So greater regulation of humans. In South Africa, they focus on cohabitation and understanding that you need to have a sustainable environment for both species, and so they work on that. And in Australia, they try to kill the shark. So I mean, it's a pretty in Australia. My analysis and my research shows them to have the worst shark management policies of any nation in the industrialized world.
How do the media in these countries react to shark bite incidents? You were mentioning that that's variable.
It's interesting. The media generally responds the same. The public perceptions of risk are the same. The difference between the three countries is the framing that you see in each one. So, for instance, in Australia, you have an established myth that's already part of public lore with the rogue shark theory, which is basically the Jaws theory that the shark, once it gets a taste for human blood, will keep coming and terrorizing a community based on a territorial attachment to a beach. So you see that in Australia. And throughout the country, and so public policies respond to that, and the policy mandates that if you have a rogue shark, it needs to be killed. The only solution to the problem of a rogue shark is to kill the rogue shark. Otherwise, it'll continue to terrorize the community, and that still is the maintained established frame for much of public policy development in Australia. In South Africa, the frame is evolving, and it relies a little bit more on specialists and scientists and marine biologists and advocates in the community. In the United States, it's swim at your own risk. So the sign is there. You need to watch out for when you get in the water. You're responsible for your own behavior and anything that happens to you. So even if the media portrays it as something, it's still there's limited policy solutions in the U.S. because you're swimming at your own risk.
What is, in your opinion, a good example of a shark conservation policy or of a humans interacting with sharks on the beach policy?
South Africa has a really advanced policy management structure for dealing with sharks. I think if I was going to put them in order again, and it's important to note that within these, the U.S. has the most shark bite incidents, obviously. South Africa the second most. And Australia the third, but the highest rate of fatality it's 20% in Australia, 12% in South Africa, and 0.5% in the U.S. So management is also dependent upon, honestly, on mortality rates. You're going to have a different, and that's why to a certain degree you understand Australia has perhaps the harshest policy. They also have you have a 1 in 5 chance of dying if you're under attack, or if you're run into a shark. And so South Africa is cohabitating. They deal with it very similar to the way they deal with African lions, and and they have a large grassroots effort to reach out to the community, educate the community, and make them be part of the policy implementation. So when they call in when there's shark spotting, and there's the lifeguards play a role, fishermen play a role, and walkie-talkie into the lifeguards so that they can tell the beachgoers. And they hired the homeless to serve as spotters up in the car park to look over Unfalse Bay, which is the largest bay on the Cape. So it's a much more interactive policy, and again, at the center of it is the idea that sharks and humans can cohabitate in the water, can both enjoy the water together, and that's what makes it the best policy in the world. All right.
How do indigenous cultures and their perceptions of sharks play a role in these sort of policies? In Hawaii, we saw that the native Hawaiians revere sharks as gods, and a strong shark conservation law just passed there. We just heard this morning from an indigenous Australian talking about the role of sharks in Dreamtime lore. Do those things play a role?
They do play a role. I mean, using Australia as an example, bull sharks are revered in godlike qualities in Australia, just as they have a really prominent place in Hawaiian culture. And So among Pacific Islanders, among the greater Islander community, there is enormous respect for sharks and the role that they play in the ecosystem, in the role that they play, again, in cultural mythology. In Australia, that hasn't translated into more favorable policies. In Hawaii, you note that it has. And in fact, when they had a severe culling in Hawaii following an attack several years ago, there was a large outcry from the indigenous community around about the role tiger sharks play in the ecosystem. They are an important part of Hawaii, of the Hawaiian landscape, and they need to be protected. And they went and did that. We're not there yet in Australia. In South Africa, there is a different. I'm not aware of a similar sort of indigenous community relationship to a native species of shark. But having said that, you do see it in Pacific Islander communities, and it does impact. Palau is a good example, and some of these other countries are good examples of Islander communities that appreciate sharks and enact laws to protect them.
What can somebody do if they're not a scientist, if they're not a politician, they're just a concerned citizen? What can they do to help improve the shark conservation policy within their country, whatever that may be?
I think the number one thing is to note that sharks don't attack people. I use sort of the vernacular because shark bite incident can be a bit clunky, but the simple fact is, I think when we think about it, we need to recognize the fact that sharks don't attack people any more than I attacked a buffet at Shoney's. It simply does not happen. That is not what they're doing, and I think that the social amplification of risk. When your friends talk about, I'm afraid to go in a swimming pool because I'm going to get attacked by a shark. Sharks don't attack people. Bumping into a fish while you're swimming in the ocean is a perfectly natural thing to have happen, so the number one thing is to guard against our own social amplification of risk in the way that we frame it. And the first is the frame that says that sharks attack people, because that's simply not what's happening. And I think that goes a long way toward it. And then when your friends say, well, I'm afraid to go swimming in the lake, or I'm afraid to go swimming in a pool, then I think you need to call them out on it and say, this is not, we need to move past this and not let the movie Jaws dictate public policy and public perception in wherever we live.